Welcome to Designing Cities for All, another episode, and it's part of our 2-year-long activity and research program,
where we take a deep dive into designing products, spaces, and systems for all.
Just because you feel safe, or you feel welcome, or you feel included, doesn't mean that everyone else around you feels the same way.
We don't stand alone. We're not individuals that somehow a planet or an island, you know?
And I think that's the beautiful thing of a diverse society, that everyone can add something from out of their own experience.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
I think if you can build relationships and use design as a tool to build those relationships, the better off we're all going to be.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
Belonging is a very, very important concept.
You can try to take someone's place for a while, but you don't have the lived experience.
Let's begin by acknowledging similarity and affinity.
Be a person, not your role.
I think inclusion is not a choice.
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
In order to create truly inclusive public spaces that are accessible to everyone, we have to underline what everyone actually is.
Real inclusion, it's got nothing to do with the norm, but it's like something that we create from all different perspectives.
You know, so even when we bring everybody at the table, does everybody's voice count the same?
Because it's a big question of who tells these stories.
You know, the more I explore about other cultures, other religions, is the more ingredients I have to make the architecture and to answer the questions I get from society.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
Hello and welcome everyone tonight here in Pakhuis de Zwijger. You just saw the trailer of the first year of Designing Cities for All, which is the research and activity program of which tonight is part. And in this program, we uncover and we explore the way places, spaces, and products are designed. And we never do that on our own, as you can see. We have some lovely guests for you tonight. And to introduce the topic of tonight, let's start with some words. Participation, engagement, co-creation, involvement, and inclusion. I think we've all heard these words before, probably many times. But I wonder whether we all know the meaning of them, and especially the meaning of them in relation to design. In this field, they're also used in business and in urban planning. And as we've seen in this trailer, but also as we've talked about in previous episodes of Designing Cities for All, real inclusion only happens by design or not at all. So today's question is, how can we shift from talking only about users to designers, co-designers, to include people in this process? And we also ask each other the question, or ourselves, is it always necessary to include everybody? And if so, in how far and how do we do it? So tonight, in the triptych Together We Design, we're going to start this exploration, and we're going to talk about the intention, the conflicts, and the impact behind participatory design. And this is the first part, as I said, with the question, is everyone a designer? So with me today are, and I'm starting at the far end of the table, Maria Piels, James Veenhoff, Anja Noyons, Tim de Vos, and Jiska Gijsels. Welcome, everyone. And we're not just talking with you here at the table, but also with you in the room, in the studio, and with the people at home. For you in the studio, you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and someone will come running towards you with a mic. Please do wait until the mic is with you so that we can hear you and also on the stream. And for the people at home, we have a Mentimeter, which we make use of. And behind me and in your screen, you can now see the code, which is 43661980. And if you send in your questions, if you can, please direct it to one of the speakers. And I will do my very best to incorporate it into the program. Without further ado, let's start. And I would love to start with James. Hello, James Veenhoff, who is the founder of Frontier, but also the author of the book called Collaborate or Die, which is kind of a provoking title, which I love. And one of the visions of Frontier is to co-create beyond boundaries, collaborate, and move society forward. So I'm wondering, what would be your definition of co-creation? How do you understand it?
So it's an interesting question, because we know from the last cycle that words are fundamental.
Very powerful.
Yeah, so co-creation is defined by us, at least, as the collaborative process of creating new value together with experts and stakeholders. So in practice, that means making new stuff together with other people that aren't already in your team.
Okay.
That's the operational.
And is your team therefore ever expanding?
Yeah, so ad hoc, it can consist of very many people or just a few. But in our process, project teams always consist of partners and clients, but then at certain specific moments, we expand that to include all kinds of so-called experts. And experts can be anyone that has a valuable perspective to contribute.
Yeah, so we can also think of anthropologists or art historians or...
Anthropologists, yeah.
That's
exactly,
you,
yeah.
right?
So it could be anyone that's considered a contribution.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily need to be 1,000 people, but it could be many people. So for example, when we redesigned the Eurovision Song Festival for the Dutch entry,
yes,
we asked, how can Eurovision represent the Netherlands? And we had 100 collaborative experts on the panel, but other times it's only 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you would think designers, these people have been educated to do what they do.
Yeah.
Why do we need the perspective of all these other people?
Well, in the context of this project, I would say to avoid myopia or bias on the one hand, and on the other hand, to recognize the role that other people have in the design or the conception and the use of something beyond just the designer.
Yeah.
So designers obviously are trained to actually conceive and visualize or bring to life whatever it is that you want to make. But in that process, inspiration, learning, perspective, input, demands, needs are often best articulated by other people. Because it's very hard to empathize in someone that you seriously have no idea about how their lives might be.
No, and you
matter
might
how
not
good a
have
designer you are.
not ever met these people even.
Yeah, it's very easy to think, oh, I can imagine what someone in somewhere else feels or needs. But you don't, on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's important to sometimes recognize people just so that you can honestly say that you have the mandate to proceed with something.
Yes. And in your book, that we just mentioned, Collaborate or Die, which you co-wrote with Martijn Pater.
Yeah.
You also say something interesting. You say that collaboration is in our DNA.
Yeah.
But that we've sort of lost it along the way.
Mm.
How did this happen? How did we get here?
Yeah, that's a really nice part. That was actually written by my partner, Martijn.
Yeah?
But yeah, so during our process, we've done hundreds or even thousands of co-creation projects in the past 20 years that we've been working. And what we find is that once people are engaged in the process of co-creation, if it's well moderated and well structured, we enjoy it because as humans, we're wired to collaborate. That's sort of what we're trying to say. And yet in our professional training, we are compartmentalized. You're the designer, you're the finance guy, you're the insights lady. And so we sort of entrench ourselves in the perspective that we've been given professionally. And many professional procedures sort of fall into this sort of formal perspective. And someone in the introduction said, don't be your role, be your person. And anyway, so through co-creation, we're sort of allowed to tap into this deeper joy of combining perspectives, finding solutions. So that's why we say, so when kids are playing in the sandbox, they might get into a fight, but automatically they're building sandcastles together, right? So that's why the quote about children is in there.
So basically that DNA should be incorporated into organizations more because it's also a natural given.
Well, I'm not saying it should be done more because it's natural. I'm saying if we don't, things will go wrong, hence collaborate or die.
Okay, we'll get back to that later. Do you have any very illustrative examples of processes of co-design that you've used or participation in the past that you want to tell us about that were very informative or like super successful?
Oh, that's super successful. I'll have many. No. There are so many. So one that's perhaps easy to explain how a variety of perspectives might work, whereas an architect on its own might not. So any of you who have the pleasure and luxury of traveling business class, when you go to Schiphol, there's now a new business lounge.
Mm-hmm.
And that was conceived in co-creation rather than in design. And we brought together neuropsychologists who deal with how space interacts with our minds and our emotions, frequent flyers, Dutch design experts, Dutch horecabazen, like pub owners,
entrepreneurs,
all those perspectives, and the top stewardess from KLM, and the guy who sells all the tickets from KLM. And collaboratively, we came up with a business, the business lounge, which I think it's so unique, it's become a destination in itself. At least that's the sort of the marketing strapline.
So people will miss their flights.
People will fly over Amsterdam to be there because it's so different from all the others.
Okay.
And the cool thing is that the concept and the design and the ideas that were developed in the session were so strong that they survived all of the finance talk, all of the architects, all the building, and you can now still go in there and actually sleep at the business lounge. You can actually anyway, so that's my example. I won't take too much time, but it's really an interesting place to visit, and you can see the concept in life, which I like.
It makes me want to be a business flyer.
Yeah, you should. Oh, you should fly business, girl. It's the only way to travel.
Maybe in some years. Who knows? I'm switching to Maria. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You're an architect at INBO, and yeah, as an architect, naturally you also have to collaborate because you probably have someone giving you a tender or something. Can you tell us how you relate as an individual architect to these more collaborative processes?
I think, first of all, normally we do collaborate, but that would mean with different stakeholders, let's say a construction engineer or somebody who's going about the ventilation or a landscape designer, all those different professionals.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a way to design where you actually design with the users. And if you work on buildings that are not housing, so a school or anything else, that's already more common to do so because you have the specific needs for all the people who are going to use that building. But then for housing, it's not that common yet. A lot of buildings are designed with the same principles, something we've been doing for over the past, 40 years, maybe even more. So you make the same apartment structure, you copy it around, and you make a facade around it. It's like, of course, it's a bit more complex, but it's hard to understand how we can still copy and make these same buildings and use these same units to make something that should work for all of us.
Yeah.
And something we're seeing now, a lot of architects have been doing so, but what we're trying to do is, by co-creation, design housing. And then not just for a building of 30 people, or maybe the lucky few can afford it and have the money to pay a bit more to make it all work, but just for the common complexes that we're doing. Yeah.
That's really great. So where normally we might think of, a house as bedrooms, kitchen, living room, we're now breaking walls, so to say.
Yeah, and it's not totally bottom up, because there are restrictions and there are difficulties and maybe also reasons why we haven't been doing this so far. So we're trying to come from two sides and trying to see what we can do. And as an architect, you're like absorbing all the information you get, so from these users, but also from the finance guy who tells me I can't do it, it's too expensive.
Yeah.
So we just go into discussion and try to figure out, so what can we do? And I think every project we do, we will understand the process better and we'll do even more next time. But for now, we're, for example, working on a project of 135 units.
Mm-hmm. And this is Vreeswijkpad, right?
Yeah, it is.
And I think you brought some images to show us.
I did. Let's see how it works. Yeah. Here you see an image of the garden, communal garden. For us, it all started with a concept, like making...
Maybe for the people who don't know, where is Vreeswijkpad?
Oh, of course. This is in Amsterdam. Southeast.
Yes.
So it's not the inner city of Amsterdam, but a bit in the outskirts where it's already very green compared to other parts of Amsterdam. And what we wanted to do here is create an environment where living and green really comes together. So what you see in the image here is a landscape have 3 layers of green and communal garden and all the galleries with wood and a big tree. How this place will be used, so what is the function of the garden, we don't know yet. Maybe it will be a sports garden. Maybe people will grow their own vegetables, or it's a flower garden like the Keukenhof we have here in the Netherlands. Anything should be possible, and right now we're in the beginning phase. There was a tender. We won the tender, and now we're, it's really exciting to be able to work on the project with a lot of different designers. And now we're trying to work on the first phase to make all the guidelines and toolboxes. So in the next phase, when people really come and want to buy an apartment, they can discuss with us on how it should be.
Yeah. And something special about the tender was that the jury was not just professionals, but existed also out of a group of users. Am I right?
Yeah, that's true. So it's really just people who live in Amsterdam or any other around this neighborhood who were able to also discuss and judge us. So some things that we made were houses where we say different generations have to be able to live together. Because we had some test panels where people told us we need that. That's already how we live. That's already what we do. If I would buy an apartment, that's what I would change. So we also presented this, and that helped a lot. And then also afterward, when we got the jury report, the professional jury told us, like, nice idea, but I'm not really sure if people would want this. Yeah.
Well, guess what?
Yeah. And then you have the citizen jury who told us, like, very nice, this is what we need. Yeah. So maybe you have a hinge. Maybe you might think, like, oh, this is something I've heard, or my friend, or it's my family also does the same. But if you don't have like a citizen jury who tells the professional jury this is what the people need, it won't happen.
Yeah, and it also says something about at what stage do you start the co-design process, basically, because the people in the jury were not necessarily the people who are going to live in these apartments, but they do have the experiences to bring in.
Yeah, they do. So we didn't have to talk with these people. It was not a requirement in the tender, but we worked together with a local, like a local guy who has these discussions all the time. Like, why are people moving out of the city? What are they actually looking for? So he has these groups that he can always call, and we had a sit down together with them. So even if we had an idea, we showed some floor plans, they changed it completely. So that really helped us.
Yeah.
And I think we should do it again, an extender, if we do so. So I don't have the network, for example, in this neighborhood. And it's very important to then again work together with somebody else who has that specialism, because otherwise you just think you're doing it right, but there is so much more to it. And also people might not want to talk to me because they don't know me, but they might want to talk to somebody who's already rooted in that community.
Yeah. Oh, you're hitting so many of the talking points that we're gonna hit today. So that's great. And again, we'll also come back to you. And we're switching to Anna, who's sitting right next to me, social designer.
Yes.
And founder and creative director of Ink Social Design Studio.
Yes.
Also, welcome to you.
Thank you.
And you said recently, and I think this is something we saw in the trailer as well, in an interview, that you identify as a designer from the idea that everything around us is design. Everything?
Well, some trees might not be designed, but I think definitely in the Netherlands, I think every square centimeter is man-made. So yeah, I think quite literally everything is designed. But I mean, it's a provocative statement, of course. But I think the reason it was also mentioned in the introduction is that, to me, it's a very inspiring frame. Because through the realization that everything is designed, it can be redesigned. And so you, from that derives a responsibility for everything around us, because if we don't change it, we're complicit with it. So I think that I like that brings me fire. I always say designers are constructively disappointed with the status quo. And I think that is, to me, that's a very inspiring state.
Yeah.
So, and I think the more I work in the public arena and in the public field, the more I realize how much designs like laws interfere with the services that are provided by municipalities and that shape our our common space, our surroundings.
Yeah.
So I think those things are all very much intertwined, and they cannot be seen as separate.
No.
I think that's also the reason why social designers are becoming more and more systemic designers, because we used to be just for the colors, and I think more and more we're also called for more profound problems.
Yeah, because at Ink Social Design Studio, you design. Am I saying this right? You're coming from a social perspective, but you also design products.
Yes. So we try to. I very much believe in the power of design. So I don't think everyone is a designer. I don't know if that's cursing in the church.
No.
Because I think designing is actually very much a profession, and it's very much a skill set. But I think it can be used in many areas, and as a designer, you also have to really understand your role. So we cooperate very much with experts and with our users and with citizens and whomever is connected to the field that we work in, because very often we are the nitwits. We are the people that don't know anything about the subject yet, which is a very powerful position usually, because it makes you ask stupid questions, which are never really stupid questions, because you see the things that are odd, or you ask yourself, why is it this way? And I think that's something that you can only do for a very short amount of time, because if you work in a certain arena for too long, then you become part of the system. Yes. But I think that is a very valuable and important role for a social designer, which we take on, and it brings us into in many different and very interesting topics. We work in education, we work in childcare and social housing projects. Sustainability, so many different.
Yeah, and you said, okay, so as the designer, you're sort of the outsider, you're the observer, but you try to design to bring out the best in people. How do you do that?
So that's our mission. So we always say we make product, services, and systems that bring out the best in people. I was part of the founding team of Peerby before I founded Ink. And for me, that's always been a very, very good example of creating a service that people love to use, but that also really elicits behavior that is good for everyone.
So what's Peerby?
Peerby is a platform that allows you to share household items with your neighbors. So if you need something, a power drill, you type in power drill, and then a little story on why you need it. And then we ask your neighbors, so we ask around for you, we ask your neighbors, can you lend Anna the power drill? And this works very well. So there's a lot of people sharing goods on Peerby. And for the time that I was part of it, it grew enormously. And there was actually a lot of research also conducted on the platform and on its use. And it really contributes to social cohesion, for example, in neighborhoods. Mm. Because people see, and that's what we did that on purpose. So we showed other people that their neighbors, the behavior of their neighbors, so that their neighbors were actively sharing items with each other.
In numbers or by experiences?
Just by profile. So there was like a little wall that told you Jasper has been lending his power drill to Lieke, or and so you could see the activity in your neighborhood, and it actually gave people a real boost of, oh, I'm actually living in a really nice neighborhood. I have great neighbors. I should also participate in this sharing.
And also maybe a sense of, if they're doing it, I need to do it too, because otherwise I'm not a nice neighbor.
Well, actually, people really like to do good. It's a misunderstanding that people are evil. I don't know who came up with that, but it's just not true. People love doing good things, and that is what Peerby really taught me, is that this app enabled people to be a good neighbor and made it very easy. And our biggest problem with Peerby was that we had way too many people on the platform who wanted to lend out their stuff. We had super neighbors, as we called them, and they pressed yes or please come and borrow something over 300 times. Or they would call us or send us an email and say something like, yeah, I've been trying to lend out my staattafel, my standing table, for 6 times now, and I was never chosen. Can we please make sure that I can lend out my staattafel? So
is this working?
Yeah, it's right. Yeah. But we had an absolute overkill of people wanting to share their items. So our biggest problem was that we had to stimulate people to borrow more, and that's a really nice problem to have. But it really taught me that we can design interventions, things, product systems that bring this part bring this part out in people and stimulate this side of us. And I think, sadly, when you look at our public space currently, we have created a lot of spaces and a lot of services and a lot of products that don't bring out the best in us, and it really tap into our, Stone Age brain that doesn't always works best for us long term. Yeah. We figured out very well how we can manipulate people in that sense, and that's a scary superpower. But I think we can also use it for good, and that's what we do with Ink.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, James, you wrote in your book sort of that turning point where we sort of moved away from these more natural behaviors of wanting to do good, of wanting to collaborate. But yes, again, we'll come back to that, unless you want to.
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting what Anna's saying. If we design public space with the perspective of a space where people can consume public space rather than contribute. There's this lovely Dutch expression, halen en brengen. And as Peerby has shown, people want to participate and want to exchange and want to contribute to public life. But if the system isn't designed to make that happen, then many people feel disengaged from the public space because there's nothing that they can contribute. So
yeah,
I
that's
think
very
that's
much happening currently.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can only take what you want and not contribute, or if there's no feedback loop or there's no handelingsperspectief, great word, to contribute, then you feel alienated from your own surroundings. Whereas in the olden times, you could watch the neighbour's kids, or you could pick up the parcel, or whatever.
Yeah.
So interesting point to further discussion.
And before we move to Endeavour, I was told by my lovely colleagues that someone was raising their hand, and there will be a mic within a second. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question around the role that you said that you have as a designer, because I was also involved in the development of a platform that was related to quite a technical topic on sustainability. And I noticed that I kind of tried to understand everything around the technical topic. So I wanted to ask how you avoid this and actually stay clear of your role as a nitwit, so to say.
Yeah, good question. So how to not accidentally become an expert. How to stay dumb. I think as a designer, you try to actively take the perspective of the people that you design for, and that's a skill again that you train, but also something that you have to actively bring yourself in the position of users, and you can do that by talking to them a lot, and also, I mean, co-creating in the sense that you think together and you brainstorm together. I think that's never a bad idea. So forcing yourself into other people's perspectives keeps you fresh, I think, and talking to different experts is also very necessary, and also trusting that you don't, in order to create a vision, you don't necessarily have to understand everything, every underlying technological detail. So when I was studying in Delft, I studied industrial design in Delft. It was my previous education, and we learned to design any product, any industrial product. And it's not that I understand every engine that was ever made, but I do know how to design a landmower. I hardly ever do it anymore, but and I didn't have to understand every detail. So you learn also that there is different levels of experience on which you can think, and you distinguish those levels.
Thank you. Yeah, as said, Endeavour, welcome, Tim and Jiska. Great to have you here. You're both engineer, architect, and managers, and Tim, you're also the co-founder of Endeavour. And it's interesting because Anna just said, I don't think everyone is a designer, but one of the inspirations you took is from a quote by Jane Jacobs, activist, and she says, cities have the capacity of providing something for everybody, but only because and only when they are created by everybody. Do you want to explain?
So I prepared some slides, but
yes,
I'll refer to them later, so I can.
I'll get the clicker for you. Thank you.
But yeah, we are very much inspired by this quote by Jane Jacobs. Why? Because she kind of points to something very fundamental, that it's not only about involving people in the process of, let's say, participatory plan making. She's explicitly talking about the process of city making. Mm-hmm. The idea that cities, or the process of city making, is something which is, by definition, sort of a communal fact, something you do on an everyday basis. People who use public space essentially co-create public space and the way it is used. And so that's what inspired us very much, is that we should really question not only what kind of participatory tools do we use, question how do we involve people in plan making, fundamentally question, so how do we involve broader society in these kind of spatial transformation processes. Mm-hmm. And that's why she triggers us that much. Also because she's a journalist, a researcher, but also an activist. And I think we started our practice out of sort of a sense that there's a need for a renewed kind of activism within our field of spatial planning, where you fundamentally question the way we involve people in this act of plan making. And throughout the let's say, the founding of our practice, but also in the way we work, we try to look for this kind of overlap between being entrepreneurs, but also being activists at the same time. And that's why we're so triggered by what she does, and what she used to do, and what she stands for. Yeah. And that very much.
Is it sometimes hard to be an activist and an entrepreneur engineer at the same time?
Well, you could say it's a very difficult balance you have to strike. But in our case, it works in a very productive way. It's something we also discovered along the way. We started up our company out of a frustration about how participation was dealt with as a sort of one-off ready-made solution, where you involve people in the idea of finding consensus on a plan rather than questioning a plan or the agenda, or why are we actually making a plan for a particular area developments. And so we started the company as a sort of a movement of activism, working together with a local neighborhood community. And as we developed and we started getting, let's say, formal assignments and working for local governments, after a while we got sort of, I don't know, the feeling we had to trigger something new again. And so I remember this phase where a building was put up for sale in the center of Antwerp, a public building, put up for sale at the highest bid, sort of a closed procedure. So whoever bid the highest would get this building. And we were so kind of, I would say, discouraged about this whole movement of we're working on inclusive cities and participatory design while cities are actively putting real estate on the market at the highest bidder. And so we started accidentally almost a sort of a movement against the sale of this building, and basically going against the grain of the people we're working with for the next day, being the local government. And we saw that this was not necessarily a contradiction.
No, what was their response?
Their response was very biased. I would say it was a political decision to put this on the market, but a lot of the people in the local administration were absolutely hoping or crossing their fingers that our kind of counter movement would kind of strike
on a personal level.
On a personal level, but also because it's a very difficult, like spatial development touches on so many different disciplines, so many different actors. It's about politics, but it's also about, let's say, local people working on qualitative urban space on a daily basis. And I think what we found out is that we often collaborate or form coalitions with different actors to engage in what we call sort of a form of moving from kind of being entrepreneurs towards activism. And it's not necessarily a contradiction. And with every assignment we get, we question the actual assignment and often find that there is always a hidden agenda behind this assignment. And often that, is a way of collaborating in new ways.
We're talking a lot about roles. Jiska, what is it that you do at Endeavour? What's your role there?
But my role is in the projects, you mean? I have a very diverse portfolio of projects.
But mostly it's the managing of the process and who you need to involve, and also in which way. But yeah, it's like, as Tim says, it's always first is the question and fixing it, let's say. I think to also maybe get back to your question, what we do a lot is be the translator between the expert roles and the users, and you have to understand them both, and you want to understand one better than the other, one to know the agenda, the other one to know who you are working for. I think that's also a very important role that we play. You have the people that use the very high-end words and that sometimes don't really know what they're talking about. By asking stupid questions, you get to know if they know what they're talking for and what they're standing for. So it's not one role, I guess, I have, but it's...
making the processes somewhat more accessible for people that might have a distance toward these processes. Because I think that's maybe a question for all of you. How do you make sure that people know that they're being viewed as co-designers? How, like, even before you put out the question of, hey, do you want to work with us, or we need your voice? Like, how do people have the confidence to think they have something to add? Maybe I'll start with... Yeah, sure.
Actually, we just talked about that. With part of my team is in the audience. We just talked about that today. Is that I think part of the role as a designer is very much also understanding how to enable the people that you collaborate with, because the way you facilitate that conversation very much determines the kind of information that you're going to get. So also in which part of the process you are involving people very much defines what you want to know from these people, right? It made me think of one of the first design assignments that I got in school still. But I had to make a play... Speeltoestel.
For play. Something in a playground.
Yeah, something in a playground.
If anyone knows the translation, you can shout now.
Yeah. And there were two moments that I involved the children, and they were very different. So in the very beginning, I just asked them to draw their fantasy play thing. And obviously, there were all dragons and impossible things. But it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that you have to make a dragon, right? It means that you try to understand where their fantasy is going and what their desires are. And for me, it very much, I could very easily conduct, they want something modular, they want something that is not safe, they want something that is really a bit risky. And so there were kind of design requirements derived from that early participation. Yeah. But it's different from co-creation. That's why I think co-creation is very different from that sort of, I don't know, collaboration. And then later on in the process, I showed the kids my prototypes again, and they were able to demolish the ones that they didn't like. And then we ended up with someone. So
they were happy in the end.
Yeah, I think so. Unfortunately, it was never built because it was just an assignment in school, but still.
Did you, as Endeavour, have an example you wanted to share of which you?
Well, many, but I would say, let me scroll through this a bit. So, I think what's something fundamental, what I really believe in, there's a long tradition of trying to understand how people use public space, how social interactions shape public space, but somehow we've sort of forgotten about this very long tradition, or like. It's almost as if, as designers, we're trained to sort of know better, but really looking at public space, observing, and going into dialogue with people on how they use public space is something which is vital. It's very important. And I think it's really at the sort of forefront of what we try to do. And I think a lot of the work we do, which is why I like to use this example, is really looking for tailor-made methodologies of how do you actually engage people in a sort of research process of understanding space, how it's used, which is not as simple as it might seem. It's not like we just put people around the table and make them talk and then we'll get something out of it. So we very much believe that although we're trained as spatial designers, we don't really design plans or we don't design buildings, but we design the methodologies of how you engage with people. And we think that's an act of design. Like, for example, coming up with methodologies of how to involve children in mapping their own neighborhood in physical space, which is something we did there, is something essential, or really looking in great detail at interactions in public space and graphically translating them to sort of bridge this often gap between social knowledge, the everyday space, and sort of conceptualizations of space, which is something, abstractions, which designers make. And that's a lot of the work we try to do.
I was going to ask, because what do we see here? Is that a mapping of these interactions?
Yeah, this is a project we did for the city of Antwerp, where we had to analyze a couple of spaces in the city which were regarded as being very unsafe, because it was a study on safety and public space. What we discovered is that in, let's say, in the numbers, the quantitative data on criminality, it's absolutely not a very dangerous place. But there's a very big perception about it being unsafe. But when we ask people, so what are the fundamental social interactions which make you feel unsafe? People just couldn't answer it. It was as if there was a sort of a veil around it, a perception that it was unsafe. But then if you ask the question, but has anybody actually spatially mapped what was going on? It didn't really happen. So what we did is in great detail, observe, map, and use this map as a new methodology for a dialogue between different parties, for a local police officer together with a local shopkeeper, as a sort of, we called it the phenomena atlas of the neighborhood, really kind of mapping these small little details which greatly influence how you feel in public space. The fact that it's a commercial street, a lot of people park their little vans in there, but these little white vans completely block your view in the street, which makes you feel like it's a very narrow space, which makes you feel very uncomfortable. But it's something you can fix, because it's a design issue. It's where you facilitate this kind of short-term parking. And these kind of things, you might know a lot of them, but observing them, putting them on a map, and using this map as a medium for dialogue, it was very important to us. And I think that's at the forefront of everything we try to do. Yeah. Coming up with these tailor-made methods to do so.
Great. Thank you. Before we go on to the rest of the panel conversation, I just want to remind you of you're allowed to ask questions. We love them. For the people at home, use the Mentimeter. And I think if I say this, the code will appear again. Yes, there it is on the screen. And just to also say it out loud. Where is it? There. Thanks. 43661980. And I'll receive them here on my iPad. And for you here, follow the example of just now and just raise your hand. Coming back to you all, we just talked about that, yes, co-design is very important. And I think all of you are very much ingrained with the sense of you need to collaborate, you need to participate. But you are also, I think, the front runners, the people in the front. What about the design world or the world of architecture as a whole? What needs to happen to create this shift of people understanding that collaboration is vital? James, can I maybe give you this question?
The one person in the room has nothing to do with architecture?
Well, not just the field of art, just like generally to collaborate. But I feel slowly but surely it's starting to become a popular thing to do, or much rather, as Tim just said, it used to be something that people tick boxes for, but slowly but surely I feel that that's going to change. But what is needed to make the movement bigger?
Well, I think to answer that question, I'm going to have to be slightly cynical. I think a lot of the change that's coming through right now is driven by different rules and sort of spotlights on the financial structure behind urban development. And, for example, the need for developers or the money behind developers to comply with far brighter rules. People are asking about, okay, so how have you incorporated the SDGs? How are you sensitive to the needs of the local community? And in doing so, developers are having to be better versions of themselves by saying, hey, how might we, make money and make positive impact? And then they go, okay, so what impact should we make? And then that's when the interesting discussion starts. So I think legislation is a great way to change the system. Also, I think, the whole movements like B Corp are showing that you can be an enterprise, an entrepreneur, and be committed to progress.
Because B Corp is?
A B Corp is a system where you can give yourself super high amounts of homework to do and become a better company. So the thinking is that the more B Corp, the better for the planet, basically. So it's transparency, equality, you know, all that kind of great stuff. And so you're seeing more and more brands becoming activists, not just agencies, but, you know, if you think of brands like, I don't know, Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia, they're quite vocal, they're quite out there, and they're showing that, you know, you can be profitable and contribute to a more inclusive and more regenerative economy.
Yeah, and Maria, do you see this change, because you are an architect, what happens in these tenders? Because that's also where the big money is. Do you see a change there? Or also maybe start with your initial response to James?
Exactly, it's the financial part, I think, often that's the bottleneck in these processes. And if we just keep talking about this idealistic view of we want participation and this is what society wants, even though that is what we need, if it's still way more expensive than another process, if imagine in 40 years, you still have all these typical buildings, and then we have a lot of apartments and a lot of houses. Nobody wants to rent or buy your property. And this is the moment that you can actually change yourself and make something that's more appealing so you can sell anything in 20 years. Because if we keep continuing this way, the problem is right now anybody would live anywhere because we don't have enough houses. So
we'll have anything.
Just any box, I would live there.
Any price.
Any price. So if that might shift at a point, and then you haven't evolved yourself, then you have a problem. And at the same time, you have to make sure that it is always like within budget, it's in the same time frame as other projects. If you can prove that, maybe more developers would want to participate.
Yeah.
And there is proof. I mean, this is a project I'm working on, but my colleagues have been working on other projects where most of the questions we get, it's quite scary to give the power to someone else. You don't know what's going to be the outcome. So people ask, like, it was probably twice as expensive, or the process was 3 years longer than normal, but that's not the case.
Yeah.
So
or it might just balance the profit that comes out of it, and profit can be broader in that sense. It can also be the duration of the success of a project. Is this, Anna and Tim and Jiska, is this something you recognize, that there is a sense that participation needs to be profitable for it to be worth it around you, the people that are not maybe yet fully involved in participation?
I mean, it needs to be sustainable. That's, I think, foremost. I think we're at a time where more people are becoming angry over the systems, how they have evolved, and how we are have created them now. So there are people now stepping in who think differently and have different desire different outcomes. And I think also the municipality, especially in big cities, are realizing what it means to sell out your city to investment bankers. So I think that is there's a structural change. But for me, actually, I think there's a lot of innovation when it comes to participation. I think there's a lot of innovation necessary in the process itself. So not so much in the literal design of one house, but very much in how does a neighborhood evolve. I've seen it happen in Noord. I live myself in Amsterdam Noord, and I've been living there for 6 years now. We built our own house there because nobody wanted to live in Noord. But then after that, we've seen the neighborhood kind of expand. But what happens very often, and we are involved in a few projects that where the same is happening, there's a lot of houses necessary now, right? And so we're developing big pieces of land, and we're just saying, okay, this is housing. And then we're developing everything at once. But I think in design, 15 years back, when we started designing software, we came to realize that this waterfall method is not so great, because you're usually, even though you involve your user at the beginning, even though you co-create, you still make a lot of assumptions about people's actual behavior, people's actual desires, people's actual ways of living. So in design, we've created this iterative way of innovating. And then usually in industrial design, you bring out first prototypes, and then you bring out version 1, and then version 2. You'd never buy version 2 because it's cheaper and it's less well produced. And then version 3, and then but you are able to kind of build upon the knowledge and the learnings that you get from the first version. And I think we should very much look at that and use that in building cities, in expanding cities, and try to not do everything at once, but do it step by step and make it better every time. But also build buildings that can evolve, and that they're not just that have one typology, and that there's only one way of using it, and it can never, the spaces can never change, because it's just not sustainable. It's just not. If you look at Soho in New York, there's these pakhuizen, what are they called?
Warehouses.
Yeah, the warehouses. Yeah. They turned out to be the most versatile spaces that we've ever known.
And they've been there for a while.
They have been there for a while. Why are we not learning from that?
Yeah.
So I think we should build much more like that.
Yeah, it's a big question also. Today's topic is everyone a designer? We've heard your view. James and Maria, what if you very briefly would have to answer this question?
Go for it.
Yeah, everybody is a designer, but there is a skill set that you own as when you've been trained as an architect. Like, we deal with participation, but at the same time, we're dealing with sustainability, we're dealing with making cities rain-proof, we're dealing with cost calculation. Like, there's a lot of things that come with it, and I don't want to bother anyone with all this information. Like, if you want to know anything about it, we'll explain everything, but there's a lot of homework you'll have to do as a professional before you can start to explain what the consequences of choices people would make would be. Because it's easy, like, you have to give them a choice, but also to be honest and say, this might not be possible if you choose this, looking at solar panels, looking at making things adaptable in the future. So people are designers, but they do need architects and other designers to make new typologies, to make something unique and innovate.
Yeah. James?
In the context of cities, I would say that definitely not everybody is a designer, yet you can interact at an equal level. And in the traditional paradigm, the designer was sort of the all-knowing, all-deciding super
superhero.
and clearly they aren't proven by the delicious quote that you just had on the screen, There is a role for more expert perspectives than the designer who's been trained to bring all the decisions together and then make the right judgments on the final actual conception.
Yeah.
But so we're not all designers, definitely not.
There's also been talk about that. People find it almost offensive when, for example, the municipality presents them with two options and they're like, well, this is our participation process, which one of them is it going to be? And I mean, obviously that's not what you mean, but how do you navigate between the space of, okay, not everything is up to everyone, but at the same time you don't want to be presenting very narrow options? Tim?
Well, it's a
you design methodology.
Very broad question, but so I think I believe that there's a certain craftsmanship to design. It's about knowing how to translate what you capture, synthesize it into a spatial decision, which is something you learn by doing it, but something which also has a really kind of a craftsmanship to it, a type of knowledge. But I do believe very much that you need to kind of know what you are asking people for, like local knowledge. I very much believe in the importance of it. I very much believe in capturing it. But it's really identifying what are the types of questions or the types of knowledge we really want to bring to the fore to be able to integrate it into design. And I think we often do not spend enough time doing that. We kind of skip that step, go towards scenarios, which is like the death trap of every designer, what you're saying, presenting people with 3 scenarios, and then you sort of cherry pick and then you'll find a hybrid which fits everybody. But I think it's really about kind of first capturing what you need to know to be able to integrate it into design on different levels, be it a spatial project, but also when it comes to very big transitions which we are facing. Let's say even on a landscape scale, like renewable energy transition requires that we understand how people experience the landscape, what they value, and what kind of entrepreneurship is present in a certain area to be able to involve people in this kind of spatial transition which we have to make. Or like a very big discussion in Belgium, like making people live in a more compact way. which is, it's a transition exercise, and it makes that we need to involve people in this whole process and understand what makes them change their behavior, which is on a whole different scale. So this kind of really identifying what we should ask people about when we are trying to make them participate, to me is a bit the key to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's important in the question as well, because you have a lot of projects where they just say, you need participation, which can be co-creation or more information mostly. And that's also a risk, because you have a lot of people then that are over-asked as well, that always say like, yeah, but I explained this last year and you're here again with a new plan or something. And it's for something else. Yeah, it's like they can't capture it themselves or get back to it and get the information back and forth. So I think that's even then a bigger task to see who you need to involve and in which way, to not over-participate them, let's say. And that's part of the question, of course, like how do you get the right question? What do you want to need from whom and at what time in your process? I think that's very crucial to the... And then it can still be co-designing, or it can be at a lower level, or picking scenarios is maybe then you're not really designing, then you're just choosing.
Yeah. No, and it seems like, I mean, what you're all saying is there's different people to involve at different times, but also maybe there's different stages to that participation. You might start off with collecting people's lived experiences to see what even is the question to be asked, and then at a later stage you can go back to these same people and say like, hey, have I translated it well, and are these the things you indeed want? Correct?
Yes. I think I actually had another thought. So.
You can have the other thought, and also I've seen your question, but maybe you want to go first?
Yeah, so one of the things that we are thinking about now in a project, or is this idea of gentrification. It's something that happens in a lot of bad neighborhoods or neighborhoods that are perceived as unsafe. Anything. I think every city knows it. But now we are in a state in the Netherlands where a lot of areas that are not cities yet, they have to be developed, they have to become cities. And we're trying to see if we can use the good things of gentrification, so the dynamics of gentrification, but then in a place where you're not moving original people that are residents out, right? So because you can start with a blank slate. And that's interesting, because that looks very much into that there is different types of people that start somewhere, and then other people come next, and then other people come next. So you allow the people that are kind of the pioneers much more participation and much more freedom and much more say and much more involvement in the creation of the space. And then that attracts other people, and then you give them another level of participation. Because I think in the neighborhood that I live in, that was all zelfbouwkavels. There were all we got a plot of land, and you can build your own house on it. It was a very distinct type of person that went for this option, right? They were all from the creative industry. We're all working in the creative industry. They were all very risk-loving people who liked a challenge.
And also people who had time to camp on the kavel camping.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. I was a little bit before the kavel camping, but yes. Actually, that is an interesting point, because that was the next phase. That was like the next people, because then there were already some houses built, and then people were seeing, wait a minute, this actually can be cool. Yeah. And then interest grew. So I think that's also a way of looking at building a city, is what kind of people do you ask first? And then there is a lot of people who really don't want to be bothered with designing their own house or even their public space. They just want chill living, which is fine. But I think you can plan for that, and I find that very interesting.
Yeah. I want to come back to the question of who is the participator. But first I'll go to you, and the mic is coming your way.
Yeah, maybe I can first say that I recognize the story about the kavel and the zelfbouw, because I know only two people who did this in Eiburg. And there was One was an architect, the other one was the designer of our astronaut training center in the European Space Agency, where I work. So it was completely correct. But my question is, how do you avoid design by committee, which sort of in my experience doesn't really work, because people will tend to come with implementation proposals. So if you put them all together, you get something illogical and inconsistent. So you have to somehow find out the underlying user need. And I want to know from any one of you who is willing to answer or wishing to answer, how do you extract, what do you do to extract the underlying user needs?
Who's going to take this one? Maybe it's a methodology question.
I don't know. It's a bit. I don't know. We're not the ones who translate it into actual design. So I would say it's not.
Well, it might be interesting when people ask a question or tell us remove a wall. Like why actually? And this is not in later stages of the project, but really at the beginning, when people don't expect something in return from it. Because when they would know if I answer the questions right, I will get an apartment, you'll get other type of answers. But I think it's very interesting to not, in these processes, to take time to go into a discussion with somebody and try to understand why they say what they say. It might have something to do with the way they've been raised or the way they live. And that is the most important to understand. And then in later phases, we might not have the time to go and talk with all these individuals. And maybe this project won't fit all those needs. So I think those first phases are the most interesting to get this really in-depth information. Not sure if somebody else experiences that way.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned this is a methodology question. I would definitely see this as a methodology question. And coming back to your question on who is the expert that you invite to collaborate, in my team, we have a specific department called the Connectors, and they think about and long list and then reach out to and find experts like Anna, for example, who are exactly the right people to contribute to the question in the phase which is at hand. So if you're in a really early stage of concept development, strategy development, you'll want people who have quite a high complexity level, tolerance to vagueness, who have quite fundamental knowledge which can help you to build a vision. Whereas when you're in more operational phase further down the line, you'll want to know exactly what you were just saying. No wall here. I want this open, right? Which is not the discussion that you want in the first sort of more conceptual phases. Also, we've learned that whenever we make an expert group to help us to co-create the next step in a project, we handpick all the participants, and we also interview them beforehand, so that we know that they have not the right motivation, because that would be judging, but the motivation that we're looking for exactly. It's not like, oh, if I give the right answer, I'm going to get an apartment, or I'm angry because I want to live in my own neighborhood. But we seek out people who will be a constructive and useful perspective in cracking the question that we have at hand. So, for example, you from the European Space Agency will know that if you want a nice, fun meeting, you don't want to invite too many German engineers, right? So we'll invite one German engineer and then make sure that the group is diverse from a perspective of profile, of energy, of expertise. So we have knowledge experts, we have experience experts, we have networking experts, we have end user profiles, and then we have people we call wildcards who sort of form the glue to pull it all together, so the idiot savants of the group. So there is a specific skill to bringing together a group who will help you find the answer, rather than going into a neighborhood saying, you know, who wants to live here? Who wants to live here cheaply? Yeah, everybody, you know. So it's all about, like you were saying, you know, it's all about defining the question that you want answered and formulating it in a way that's constructive. So in design, you always use the how might we, rather than which one do you want? You know, that's not a constructive question to ask. So it's process and methodology, definitely.
Yeah, I think this... Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that often I see in these kind of participatory processes that we go through a lot of iterations, and in the very end, then it's when agendas suddenly become explicit, come to the surface. While you've been like acting as if we're always moving towards the same goal, which we all kind of identify with, but then in the end, it seems everybody wants something different.
Yeah, again, and that's a process problem.
That's a process. So I think often the key is like try to trigger people to make their agendas explicit in the very beginning.
Sure.
Because there's always assumptions about where a certain assignment or project comes from, which is another discussion. Like everything we do is project-based. It's also problematic in a way. But I would say making very explicit, triggering people to make their wants and needs, put them on the table, translate them spatially, confront them with, like, if we put everything on the table, what everybody wants, that everything sort of conflicts and it's impossible to manage within a single space or assignment. I think that's often a breakthrough.
It's often neglected. So your team has just popped up a page from our book, which is a few words on how to make sure that your co-creation process is productive. Obviously, an introduction is just how you set up the session. But interestingly, we always work on a shared vision first. So based on a homework question and a sort of brief description of what we want to tackle, we start in a sort of dialogue in subgroups to create a vision as a starting point for whatever comes afterwards. And only then do we introduce the challenge. So people have already contributed to sort of a level playing field and a shared vision. And then the owner or initiator of the project brings a challenge, which can then be challenged. Like you were saying, you know, is this question the real question that we need answering? Or if you ask the residents, do we really want something else? Like, yeah, we want our whole family to be able to live here, or 3 generations to be able to live here. So I think definitely just going into a neighborhood and sort of vox popping people, what would you like? Or in many cases, governments want to be seen as really inclusive and sort of open to participation. But then, you know, if government's already decided, you know, it's been sold to some half bottle for $1 gazillion and they're going to build penthouses, why on earth are you, you know, entering in the process of participation anyway? So I think, you know, honesty up front or clarity up front is a prerequisite to successful co-design, because otherwise people just get frustrated and jaded. You know, you've asked me for my opinion. I've said I don't want a windmill in my backyard, and here's a windmill in my backyard. You know, that's the playing field should be transparent from the start.
Yeah, I do wonder because also there's, I don't know who of you just said this, but you know, asking, oh, it was you, Jeska, asking people over and over again to give their opinion without anything maybe in return, depending on whatever that may be, might also cause this participation tiredness. And I know for a fact that there was a neighborhood in Southeast, the K-buurt, that had called out a participation stop to redefine the terms on which they wanted to participate, rather than to having to go with the way the municipality presented it. But I was thinking, Maria, for you, the random neighbor might be just as important as the hand-picked intentional participator. How do you go about that if you want to collect the vision of a diverse group of inhabitants, for example?
I think you start looking at what's going on societal. So if it is a neighborhood where people have to move because nothing is affordable anymore, and families and all these structures that have been there for years and years are just falling apart, there might be some research up front telling us people have moved to the suburbs, so Almere or Hoofddorp. And then we are actually handpicking, trying to find people with that profile and then put it together with somebody else with another profile. I think it is very important to have somewhat of an idea of what is going on, and based on that you try to invite people. Because otherwise it's just like going out, not every project will solve all issues. So it's very important, I think, to do select if possible, and then in later phases when you have bigger groups, it might be a different case.
Yeah, when you, for example, test some of the prototypes, let's say.
Yeah, but also still then it's very valuable if you have the group that you're actually designing for to react on it.
And another question, because we've started talking about not necessarily profit, but something to get out of it, something to get in return as a participator. How does that work? Like, do these people that participate, who put in energy and time, what do they get in return? Does it ever work with money? How does that go? For maybe a question for each of you, but the person who wants to go first may go.
I would. It's again a difficult question, but I would say works on different levels. Huh? Sometimes you engage with people in participatory processes because they have a very direct stake in the issue, but that's not always necessarily the case. That's also a feeling I have. We tend to look for. I think we need to expand the scope on which levels we participate with people. As I was saying, this example of important societal transitions where we don't really know what the user side of the story is, like denser housing, like renewable energy. That's also a thing which we should see as a participatory exercise on a big scale, almost on a national scale, on a regional scale. But we always identify participation with a project-based thing. While I find that a lot of, let's say, the younger generation, they're not very interested anymore in coming to these kind of boring town hall meetings about a design of a particular master plan. But if you try to involve them on certain issues like climate adaptation plan for entire city, then that's where you get them very much on board. And it's on a different level, on a different kind of scale, but also kind of different ways of involvement, which are much less boring than trying to put people around the table. An example, we've been engaged a lot with the skateboarding community in Antwerp all of a sudden. Why? Because, for example, they were kind of pushed away from a local square, which throughout the last 30 years was always their kind of hangout. But since the corona pandemic, people came more and more to the square outside, and they were associated more and more with nuisance. And they were removed from the square. But they were saying at the same time, we are being pushed from the square, but our city is actively promoting the idea of urban sports. How is this even possible? So this is really a fundamental infliction of your right to the city as a skateboarder, as a youngster. And then you see that it's super easy to engage with these young people on these kind of issues, which are fundamental. It's about the right to public space. It's about the design of public space. It's about how do you involve these kind of people in thinking about public space and almost its pedagogical function of trying to train people on how to kind of function in society. And I find this extremely interesting, that you have to find these new way-ins to involve a much broader section of society. And there's a lot of these kind of problems which to me are fundamentally spatial. Like say, we've been involved with refugee housing, for example. Like it's a classical model is you just build a building somewhere on the outskirts of the city and put people together, and then you question why they're not getting integrated in society. And we just wondered, why is no architect or urban planner dealing with this issue, putting this on the agenda? And if you try to kind of find these kinds of way-ins, you trigger a totally different societal debate, but it's fundamentally spatial. Mm-hmm. Maybe I diverted a bit too much.
No, it's definitely okay. Anna, do you want to add?
We pay people for their time. And I think that's really a fundamental philosophical choice, because ink is derived from inclusivity. And I think a very big part of non-inclusivity is the fact that we value people's time differently. You see that's the problem with almost all inequality between men and women, is that the time of men somehow is more expensive than the time of women. We work a lot with people that are less privileged than we are, but why would we pay an expert money and someone who is our future user not? So the people that we interview or that participate with us, they're all our partners, and we pay them for their time.
Mm-hmm. Great. I really want to open up the floor to more questions from you, if there are any.
Can I just tag on to that one?
Yes, of course. And in the meantime, people in the room can think about their questions.
Because in our book, what we found from all of our projects is that there's a number of guiding principles to successful co-creation. And number one addresses your question directly. Number one is inspired to participate.
Yeah.
And this means that you have to be sensitive to the question, why would someone spend their time, effort, and energy and perspective to my project? Which means that you have to formulate the challenge in a way which is appealing, which is interesting, which gives people the feeling that they can contribute. Like we were saying, halen brengen, people like to contribute. And so we've learned that paying experts doesn't necessarily, especially in our methodology, we use half a day sessions. Mm-hmm. and we pay people. They reimburse their expenses. But we found that inviting people who are intrinsically interested to contribute to the challenge gives an interesting dynamic in the session, because everybody that contributes has the same starting point. So whether you're the hotshot owner of the client, or you're an expert, or you're a dog walker, or you're whatever other profile that we need, everybody has the same level and motivation to take part. So in earlier years, we did pay people, and then we found that they were actually just waiting for their 15 minutes to make their big point. So we choose to reimburse expenses, but not much more than that. And we found that works. Any age or gender or whatever. If you're inspired to participate and you have the time, then people do.
Yeah, that's also a key thing, I think, having the time. I noticed that in my neighborhood, if I go to a participatory meeting, the time is...
Yeah, tell you what, though, many participatory meetings are very boring and they're a waste of your time.
Yes.
And that's you ask, what do people get in return?
Problem, yeah.
People get the promise from me that they will not ever have the sense that they've wasted their time, because other things can come out of it. Fun, networking, fame. There's a whole gamut of reasons why people like to contribute and how they feel rewarded, other than fortune.
Thank you. Anyone came up with a question? Yes.
I could throw something in the discussion, maybe, very quickly. What I found sometimes is a contradiction, is that the people you can easily involve in participatory discussions, let's say on a neighborhood scale or project scale, are people who are not really in favor of change. I find this a very big contradiction. That the people who are very involved, often, I don't know, particular standpoints, are the ones who really do not want change, because they have a very clear idea of their rights.
They have laws aversion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I find this often very difficult to deal with. So I just wondered how you guys see this, or do you also perceive this? Because you paint a bit of a picture, which is very positive, which I agree with to some extent. But also we often see these kind of people taking the forefront who are fundamentally against change.
So if you want to answer briefly, and then I'll go to the question. No, that's totally okay. Do you recognize this?
I don't.
Okay.
Obviously, people who are angry have a right to share their voice, for sure. But since we don't do participation just because the people want to have been seen in sort of engaging in dialogue, we don't really tackle that at all.
We do have those situations where somebody is talking the entire night, but actually is the person who is most privileged, for example. And I don't know exactly how to deal with it yet. There's also, it has to be a moderator, somebody who steers the discussion. That's also very important. But it's very hard to get the people to participation processes that actually need it the most. Yeah. And then giving something back to them as well. And it might not be money in our cases, but information is also very valuable to understand how our entire system works, or what they can do to make changes. That's something we find important.
Yeah.
Let's just say that saying turn up and be heard is not the way to organize a co-creation project, right? You need moderation. You need to select people that you want the contribution from. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
There's different phases to the whole process, to the design process, I think, and I think the co-creation sessions that you're referring to in your agencies are also very curated, right? The people in the room are very curated. They're usually very, somehow related to the subject and already inspired by it. And I think that can be super effective. Whereas, for example, we sometimes have to design something for a very specific target audience in a municipality. So we're currently working with people who are in the participatiewet, in the bijstand. we just have to really learn and understand their context, right? And so we do handpick them, because you don't want that only the angry people show up, for example. So you want an actual understanding of sort of the average experience of this situation. But that is a very different dynamic and a very different context than a brainstorm session with experts, for example.
Yeah, so again, different faces, different people.
Yeah, different methods.
I think the question asker has changed, but go ahead.
I took over. You're all talking about very qualitative design methods, research methods, small sample groups of people, and qualitative research, I guess. I'm just wondering what role data and a more quantitative perspective takes in all these processes.
Who's going to take this one?
Well, I would like to shortly answer it. So I think qualitative research obviously is very much linked to designing and to understanding specific situations. We in Inc. we work a lot with behavioral science and psychology. So we involve, I don't know, not necessarily data. I mean, we look at research, but we look at what science is saying about people. So we don't look at just individuals and individual experiences, but we also compare that what we already know on a larger scale and on a more proven side of the certain topics. So I think that's where we involve some hard data, at least in the beginning of the project.
Yeah, I think, Maria, you just mentioned that, before you even start the participation process, you want to scan what's happening in a place before,
Yeah, but even, it's nice that he mentioned the situation of, in Dutch we call it COA, so asylum seekers who come in the Netherlands. So there are a lot of research that shows they're outside of our society, and of course it's very hard then all of a sudden you're a Dutch person, or you get a status here, and then we're complaining that they don't understand how things are working here. So there's a lot of research up front where, for example, we're looking at combining housing for these people together with other people who might need housing for short notice. And then also looking at the bigger picture where we say, why would we have spaces that are only there for 1 year, and then who could use it at the same time? So at times we put something on the agenda, and we invite parties like developers or anyone else to try to do more research with us. And then we get into qualitative research where we talk with people in the organization or user experts. But it starts with ourselves, just looking at the society and trying to see what research is out there or what we need, and then going on further. I'm not sure if other people also do it that way, or maybe it's really something for designers where we make something very tactile.
We'll leave that for the bar later. I saw a hand, but I want to know first if there's someone else who hasn't asked a question yet who also wants to ask one. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, how do you get the people to show up and participate that you want to show up and participate, like people in bijstand, whatever? I know I have my enough vinkjes. So I was asked to participate as a Volkskrant reader to work on the tabloid format when they were changing. I absolutely loved it, but of course I would. But how do you get the people who are in bijstand, those you really want to have participate, but who would not be naturally inclined to do so?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, we have some great people in our team who are very empathic and very good at making people feel seen and heard. And really listen to people's stories and their experiences. I think that's a real skill. And it's really, I think when you do it right, every person, every people likes to be seen, right? And likes to be able to talk and share their experiences, especially when you feel that people are really curious and willing to change something, willing to change the situation. And like I said earlier, we pay people, so we also that brings a much more equal positioning, because we call them experts or partners, and they really participate in the project, and they also are updated on the progress and taken along our trajectory. And people usually thank us for listening to their story at the end of an interview, or are very inspired by the process that we go through. Thankful for being a participant. So I think that is also very much a skill.
I think getting the right people is as simple as asking the right people in the right way. So identifying people that you would like to have contribute, and call them up, email them directly, write them a letter directly, saying, hey, this is what we're working on, inspired to participate, then select the best. And it's totally different if you get a message saying, hey, Frans, or whatever your name is, I got your name from Professor Robert Dijkgraaf, and he mentioned that you might be the expert that we need. It's something totally different than saying, who wants to contribute to a new plan for the neighborhood? And I think it goes to recognizing people and, empathizing with them and making them feel that you are interested enough to sort of reach out to them. So direct invitations, invite people politely, and discuss, call them first. I think anything just like a good party, you want to invite people rather than say there's a party.
Yeah, I think sometimes you just want people that you go to redirect directly, and you take them as some kind of ambassador, for example, that then informs other people if you want more people. But sometimes you also have some guys you want to involve, but that are difficult because they don't speak the language, or they have complete other... They're very busy, they don't have time, and then it's more like another way of a medium that you take. You can do some campaigns, or you use another kind of language as well, and you try to appeal to them, and by asking the right question, of course, explaining why you would like them, why it's important for them to join. But yeah.
And also, in my experience, visit them on their own terrain. Yeah. Like, if I'm dealing with a particular neighborhood where I know there's a very large population of people we're unable to reach, the way to go is just look for these people who are very embedded in these communities, who are on a daily basis organizing events, organizing excursions, whatnot, activities, and you can really plug into these activities. An example is we're working on the covering of the Antwerp Ring Road. It's an enormous infrastructural project, and people in our life worlds are all very aware of the idea of covering. Covering the ring road is something super present in the whole debate. But we've talked to people in these neighborhoods who've never heard about this entire project happening, which to us is unimaginable that this is even happening. But it's just the reality. And then when you start collaborating with, youth workers or with your local community house, and then plugging in really into the activities they are doing, giving them sort of the skill set, the tools for themselves to be able to try to engage these people, is much more productive than us inviting them on our terrain, which I think is often the key.
Great. I think this brings us to the end of this program, to the end of the night. You can all continue to talk to each other, to ask questions to the speakers at the bar. I think most of them are staying for a bit at least. Thank you all for being here and for participating in the program by asking your questions. And yeah, if you want to learn more about participation, next time, the 25th of April, we're going to continue this series, and that time we're going to talk mostly about what if it goes wrong, what are the challenges and barriers, and how do we overcome them. And the third in the series will be 1 week after that, on the 2nd of May. So please feel free to join us for that. If you want to learn more about this section of participatory design and co-design, there's a podcast with Maria that was published last Thursday, and you can listen to it, find it on our website, dezwijger.nl. And in the meantime, we're doing many things at the same time. We're also launching the next Designing Cities for All Fellowship, which is done by Dafina Misijan, and it's going to be on realizing environmental justice, really looking at redesigning the law for a better world. And yeah, it will also be the launch of a new book club. We're going to read a book together. You're also free to enroll and join us for some reading sessions and receive the book All We Can Save. And then, yeah, finally, if you want to support Pakhuis, you just saw the video and the sound already. You can help us by paying as you like, and help us do what we do on a daily basis. And for now, I'm going to wish you a good night and hopefully see you soon again.